Drug epidemic is as dangerous as any terrorist that we face. It is serious. It is an epidemic and it can kill.
The crack problem has become a crack crisis and it's spreading nationwide.
See this cute little vial here? It's crack, rock cocaine, the most addictive form. You think it's the glamour drug of the 80s? Well, that's the point of this fronted little reminder. It can kill you. And if you've got to die for something, this sure as hell ain't it.
A whole generation was marked for death long before anyone realized what was happening. In the early 1980s, America wasn't fighting a foreign enemy or a rival power or a political ideology. It was fighting something far quieter and far deadlier. At first, it appeared in Los Angeles like a rumor, something strange, something cheap, something that didn't feel like cocaine, but hit harder than anything anyone had seen. Then it spread, street by street, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, and within months, it swallowed entire families, entire communities, entire futures. Crack, a drug so cheap it needed no introduction, so powerful it needed no second try. A few dollars were enough to fall into a hole you were never climbing out of. Mothers watched their sons disappear into addiction. Fathers vanished into the night and never came back. Kids grew up stepping over needles and empty vials instead of toys, and all the while, violence multiplied. Guns flooded the streets, gangs armed themselves like militias. America kept repeating one word: epidemic. But epidemics don't appear out of nowhere. They don't fall from the sky. They spread because someone makes them spread, and this one didn't start in a Los Angeles alley. It started thousands of miles away, in a small Central American country no one in America could locate on a map. Nicaragua, a place trapped between two worlds, one dreaming of revolution, the other terrified of losing influence. During the height of the Cold War, the United States had a simple mission: stop communism, anywhere it appeared, at any cost. So, when Nicaragua's socialist Sandinista government came to power, Washington went into panic mode. A covert plan began to form in dark corners of federal buildings, one that would arm, train, and unleash a paramilitary force called the Contras, a force created to overthrow a government, a force funded from the shadows, a force operating outside the law. But covert wars need money, a lot of money, and Congress wasn't giving enough. So the people running this operation looked the other way. Or maybe they didn't just look away. Maybe they opened the door. Shipments began to move north. Not just weapons, not just uniforms, something else, something white, something profitable. Cocaine. And from there, the chain reaction was inevitable. Cocaine entered the country. Cheaper processed versions appeared. Crack exploded. Communities crumbled. And the truth stayed buried. A truth so big and so ugly that anyone who uncovered even a piece of it was silenced, ignored, or destroyed. And this is where the story truly begins. Because while neighborhoods were burning, while streets were drowning in violence, while mothers cried over children who never made it past 18, somewhere else, deep underground, a man opened his eyes in a dark room, hands tied, head spinning, voices echoing. "Wake him up. We want answers." The interrogation hadn't begun yet, but the truth had. While crack quietly poisoned South Central, another story was unfolding thousands of miles away. One that would eventually collide with Los Angeles like two storms merging into a perfect disaster. When Nicaragua's dictator, Anastasio Somoza, finally fled his collapsing regime in 1979, he left behind a nation in ruins and an elite class desperate to reclaim the power they had lost overnight. These exiles, men with political ambition and family pride, scattered to Miami, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. They arrived angry, humiliated, and determined to take back their country at any cost. Among them was Danilo Blandon, a wealthy landowner's son, who went from sipping wine in Managua's luxury clubs to wiping down old car seats in a dusty Los Angeles shop. Poverty hit him like a slap, but bitterness hit harder. He wasn't built for obscurity. Men like him, never believed they were meant to start over. He believed Nicaragua owed him something. He believed America owed him something, and most of all, he believed he deserved to rise again. In the exile community, Blandon found others who shared that same hunger. They met in living rooms, cheap restaurants, and backyards, whispering about revenge, about revolution, about returning home as liberators. These weren't gang members or street criminals. They were former elites, educated, connected, politically ambitious men who now found themselves living in cramped apartments and struggling to buy groceries. They needed money, influence, and weapons. Lots of weapons. And that's when the CIA stepped into the picture. To the agency, these exiles were not tragic refugees. They were assets, tools, the front line of a covert war. Washington didn't want another Cuba. They didn't want another revolution, backed by Moscow. If these angry exiles could help reverse that tide, the CIA was willing to listen. They were willing to support them. But support didn't mean salaries. It didn't mean weapons delivered neatly to their doors. It meant something far more ambiguous: advice, encouragement, and tacit approval. Most importantly, it meant looking the other way. When CIA-connected figures told these exiles, "Find your own funds," everyone understood the message. War wasn't cheap. Guns weren't cheap. Transport, logistics, food, uniforms, training, all of it required money, and none of them had any. Soon, the most dangerous idea in American history began to glow like an ember between them. Cocaine. It started small. A few kilos moved quietly through Nicaraguan networks. A bit of powder sold in Miami and LA. Nothing traceable. Nothing loud. But the potential was undeniable. Cocaine was everywhere now. The Colombians were producing more than ever. Prices were dropping. Smuggling routes were expanding. The drug economy was thriving underneath America's nose. And Blandon had connections. Real ones. He reached out to men he knew in the old regime. Men who weren't just dabbling in drugs, but drowning in them. Among them was Norin Meneses, a man whispered about even in Nicaragua's darkest bars. Meneses wasn't a street dealer. He wasn't a courier. He was a pipeline. Someone protected, someone feared, someone who had grown wealthy under Somoza by moving cocaine with the quiet blessing of powerful friends. When Blandon approached Meneses in the US, the two understood each other instantly. Blandon needed a way to fund a war. Meneses needed a foothold in the American market, and the CIA needed the Contras to survive. Their goals overlapped too perfectly, so together they built a pipeline. Cocaine from Colombia moved through Nicaraguan channels, protected by silence and political necessity, delivered into American cities at prices no other supplier could match. What happened next was mechanical. Dealers bought it, streets consumed it. The money flowed back to Central America in suitcases and wire transfers, feeding a war the American public never fully understood. And in Los Angeles, the cheap cocaine began to mutate. What had once been a powdered drug for businessmen and clubgoers was cooked into rocks by street chemists who discovered a simple recipe. Cocaine, water, baking soda, heat. The rocks hardened, crackled, and were broken into tiny pieces, each one containing a nuclear-level high that lasted only minutes but demanded more the instant it faded. Crack didn't spread like cocaine. It exploded. It spread through homeless encampments, then apartments, then entire blocks. It didn't move like a drug. It moved like a demon. In neighborhoods already suffocating under economic neglect, police brutality, and lack of opportunity, crack became an escape so fast and so violent that people forgot the world around them existed. And behind all of this, not in the alleys, not on the street corners, but behind conference room doors and diplomatic papers, the United States quietly fought a proxy war using drug money. Blandon kept his operation hidden behind smiles, charity dinners, and political speeches for Nicaraguan freedom. Meneses kept the cocaine flowing, untouched by local police who could never quite catch him. And the CIA, they maintained distance. They always maintained distance. They didn't need to carry cocaine. They didn't need to cook crack. They didn't need to touch a single dollar. All they had to do was nothing. Doing nothing was more powerful than doing anything. And while these men shaped the future of two nations, another story was beginning in South Central, one that nobody expected, a story that would connect a poor kid from the ghetto to the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth, a story that would change America forever. His name would soon dominate headlines, his product would dominate the streets, his empire would rewrite the drug trade. But at this moment, he was still just a teenager trying to find his place in a world determined to ignore him. Freeway. Ricky Ross had no idea that fate was walking toward him. He had no idea that he would become the spark that turned cocaine into crack and crack into an epidemic. He didn't know yet. He couldn't know. But the people above him, the traffickers, the exiles, the agents, they were already counting on it. The moment Ricky stepped into the drug world, everything around him began to shift. At first it was small, tiny bags, tiny profits, tiny risks. He still woke up early like a tennis kid. He still carried himself with the discipline his coach drilled into him. He still avoided drinking, smoking, partying. He believed that if he stayed clean, if he stayed quiet, he could dip into the underworld without letting it swallow him. But South Central had its own gravity. Every corner whispered temptation. Every alley held a broken man. Every paycheck was already gone before it arrived. The city didn't reward honesty. It rewarded speed, strength, hustle. And Ricky learned quickly that the fastest way to survive was to feed a demand that no church sermon or police patrol could ever silence. Before long, word spread. There was a kid, skinny, quiet, polite, who always had good product. A kid who didn't steal, didn't lie, didn't cheat. A kid who made deals like a businessman, not a street thug. Customers liked him. Dealers respected him. Police didn't know him. And in the drug world, invisibility is the closest thing to a superpower. Still, Ricky wasn't thinking empire. He was thinking groceries, rent, his mother's bills. South Central wasn't filled with dreamers. It was filled with survivors. But the more he sold, the more he noticed one unavoidable truth. Cocaine was not a drug. It was a fire, and America was drenched in gasoline. Hollywood actors snorted it before auditions. Athletes used it to stay awake through endless training. Club owners, dancers, businessmen, everyone seemed hooked on the illusion that powder offered. Confidence, energy, escape. Ricky realized something that changed his life forever. If he treated this as a business, not a crime, he could dominate the entire city. He wasn't violent. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't addicted. He was focused. But every growing business has one weakness: the supplier. Ricky's was an older Nicaraguan named Ivan, the same man who supplied his teacher, Mr. Fisher. Ivan was reliable, quiet, and steady. Then one night, he wasn't. A domestic argument turned violent. A gun went off, and Ivan was left paralyzed from the waist down. The pipeline dried up instantly. For Ricky, it felt like standing on a cliff, watching the ground crumble under his feet. His customers were calling. His money was tied up. His reputation was at risk. And the worst part, the streets smelled weakness. Competitors sensed opportunity. The wolves were circling. That's when a door opened. Ivan's brother-in-law, Henry, tried to fill the gap, but he was panicked, sloppy, and inexperienced. He had product but no strategy, customers but no courage. The man was drowning, and drowning people grab anyone close enough. Ricky needed stability. Henry needed someone who could move weight. Their partnership was inevitable, but Henry wasn't the real power behind the curtain. There was someone else watching, someone calm, calculating, and far more dangerous. Danilo Blandon. Blandon was nothing like the stereotypical trafficker. He wore clean suits, spoke like a diplomat, and carried himself like someone who understood politics better than the streets. He smiled often, observed quietly, and asked careful questions. He noticed everything about Ricky: the discipline, the silence, the intelligence. To Blandon, Ricky wasn't just a dealer. He was a gold mine waiting to be tapped. So Blandon made his move with surgical precision. He lowered prices, increased purity, promised endless supply. Ricky, whose entire business had been collapsing only days earlier, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the hand offered to him and, unknowingly, shook hands with a man connected to a war thousands of miles away. He didn't know about the Contras. He didn't know about secret funding. He didn't know about the political currents running beneath the streets. All he saw was opportunity. All he felt was relief. All he wanted was to build something. With his supply crisis solved, Ricky's business didn't just grow, it exploded. Dealers lined up outside his house, cars pulled up at all hours, windows cracked, cash ready. He was making more in a morning than he used to make in 6 months. He didn't carry guns. He didn't shout. He didn't act like a boss. But the streets decided he was one anyway. Then crack arrived, a cheap, ugly, unpredictable substance people whispered about in back rooms. Ricky ignored it at first. Powder was the gentleman's drug, the wealthy man's escape. Crack looked beneath him, but when he saw the effect it had on buyers, the speed, the desperation, the instant addiction, it terrified him. It terrified him because he understood exactly what it meant. Crack wasn't a drug, it was a weapon, and people would destroy their lives for it. Ricky resisted. Then he watched demand explode. Blocks turned into battlefields. Overnight, people sold everything they owned for one more hit, and the truth sank into him like poison. If he didn't supply it, someone else would. That was the moment his empire truly began. A quiet kid who once dreamed of Wimbledon became the man controlling South Central's drug heartbeat. Blandon became his shadow. Money flooded in faster than he could count it, and while Ricky believed he was building his future, he didn't realize he had stepped into something much darker. He wasn't just selling crack, he was fueling a war. He was feeding a machine far bigger than Los Angeles, and the machine was hungry. Soon, the streets weren't the only ones watching him. The government was, too. The government didn't notice Ricky at first. He was too quiet, too disciplined, too clean. Unlike other dealers, he didn't throw parties, didn't boast, didn't parade new cars around the neighborhood. His empire grew in silence, stacked behind closed doors, wrapped in newspaper bags under mattresses, bundled in rubber bands inside shoeboxes. He wasn't the kind of kingpin who drew attention. He blended into the very streets he controlled, and that made him dangerous. Ricky operated with the same precision he once brought to tennis. He studied patterns. He memorized routines. He never repeated the same route twice. He trusted no one except a small circle of childhood friends. His customers were loyal because he was reliable. His dealers respected him because he wasn't greedy. Even the police didn't know his name. They were busy chasing loud men with flashy chains, men who left blood on sidewalks and evidence on coffee tables. Ricky moved like smoke. But success has a way of drawing shadows. The first sign came quietly. A rumor, a whisper, a pattern he didn't recognize. Suddenly, customers were getting arrested in clusters. Streets he never used to worry about were crawling with patrol cars. Faces he'd never seen before were lingering near his suppliers, watching, memorizing, waiting. Ricky didn't panic, but he didn't ignore the signs either. Something was shifting. He asked Blandon about it one night while counting cash on his kitchen floor. The Nicaraguan brushed off his concerns with a smile. "No problem, amigo. Police always busy. They look everywhere. Don't worry." But Ricky didn't like the way he said it. Too calm, too smooth, too rehearsed, and somewhere deep inside him, a knot tightened. Still, the money was impossible to walk away from. With Blandon's supply, he was selling more than anyone in Los Angeles. His dealers were multiplying. New customers arrived daily. At the height of his operation, Ricky was earning hundreds of thousands per week. Nobody in the city, no gang, no kingpin, no cartel runner, came close. Even teenagers in his crew were driving better cars than local business owners. South Central had never seen anything like it. But while Ricky was getting richer, something far more sinister was happening behind the scenes. Blandon wasn't just supplying him. He was reporting to someone, meeting someone, answering to someone with political motives far beyond street turf. Ricky didn't know that. Not yet. He didn't know about the secret war being funded in Central America. He didn't know that his money was feeding a revolution. He didn't know that the product he sold was allowed to enter the country with extraordinary ease. He didn't know that federal agencies who were supposed to stop drugs were quietly looking the other way. All he knew was that business was booming, but the city was cracking under the weight of the new drug. Every block looked different now. Hollow-eyed addicts stumbling along sidewalks, families locking doors before sunset, children walking past bodies slumped in alleys. Police sirens became part of the neighborhood soundtrack. The smell of burnt chemicals drifted out of abandoned houses. The government noticed. The media noticed. Everyone noticed. And in the middle of this rising storm, one name began popping up everywhere. Freeway Rick. The nickname came from the fact that most of his properties were located near the freeways. For a long time, people didn't even know his real name. They only knew he was the man who could supply the entire West Side, the man whose crack vials were found in every corner, the man who built an empire out of nothing, and that made him the perfect target. But Ricky still believed he could outthink the system. He had survived the streets his whole life. He had outplayed enemies who were bigger, older, stronger. He remained confident, almost calm, as if the walls tightening around him were just an illusion, until the day he met the man who would become his downfall. It happened casually, almost accidentally, like fate disguised as coincidence. Ricky was driving through his usual routes when he noticed a white man standing alone outside an apartment complex. A white man who didn't fit, who didn't blink, who didn't look nervous even though he was deep in a neighborhood he had no business entering. The man introduced himself as Gary. Soft voice, polite tone, friendly smile, but his eyes were wrong, too calculating, too observant, a strange mix of innocence and authority. Ricky didn't trust him, but he didn't reject him either, because the man had one thing Ricky needed, a buyer with limitless money. That was the trap. Silent, simple, perfect. Ricky didn't know that Gary had already been briefed about him. Didn't know that he'd been studied, didn't know that the government had finally spotted a flaw in his armor, a flaw named trust. For the first time, Ricky let someone into his business who wasn't from his world, someone who didn't grow up in South Central, someone who didn't understand loyalty, survival, or the unspoken rules of the streets, someone who wasn't poor, someone who wasn't desperate, someone who had an agenda. While Ricky believed he was building his empire to its greatest height, he didn't realize he was walking straight into a government operation engineered to burn it all down. The hands that fed him the product were the same hands preparing to slap handcuffs on him. And the man pretending to be his friend was the man who would one day testify against him. It was the beginning of the end, but Ricky still couldn't see the fall coming. The empire felt too strong. The money felt too heavy. And the trust he placed in the wrong man felt harmless. It wouldn't stay harmless for long. Everything around him was about to collapse, and somewhere in the shadows, Blandon was already preparing to disappear, quietly, cleanly, and protected by the very people who claimed to be fighting the war on drugs. The deeper Ricky walked into Blandon's world, the more the lines between friend and enemy blurred. Everything felt too easy, too clean, too perfect. The product always arrived on time, wrapped tight and flawless. The money flowed like an endless river. Nobody interfered, nobody questioned anything. It was as if the police had simply vanished from South Central, as if someone had placed a shield over the entire operation. Ricky didn't understand it. He only felt it. A quiet uneasiness, like a low vibration under the floor, something he couldn't see but could feel through his bones. He told himself it was paranoia, that success was supposed to make a person nervous, but a small voice inside him whispered an uncomfortable truth. Nothing good in the hood ever stays this good for this long. Still, he stayed the course. Too much money was coming in to step back now. He was buying properties, block after block, house after house, turning entire neighborhoods into his empire. His dealers didn't just work for him. Many lived in his buildings. He became a landlord, a boss, a supplier, a mentor, a myth. Neighborhood kids saw him as a hero. Struggling families saw him as a provider. Broken men saw him as the person who gave them another chance. But none of them saw the cost. The streets were changing faster than he could keep up. Crack didn't just ruin lives, it swallowed entire families whole. It turned good men into thieves, mothers into ghosts, fathers into shadows. South Central wasn't just suffering, it was collapsing. Ricky watched this destruction with a guilt he buried under more work, more deals, more money. He told himself he wasn't forcing anyone to buy anything. He wasn't pulling the trigger. He wasn't making anyone smoke. Yet every night, when the city quieted, he felt the weight pressing down on him. One night, after a long day of counting stacks of cash, Ricky had dinner with Blandon in a small, dimly lit back room of a local restaurant. And the Nicaraguan arrived, wearing a suit sharper than usual, his smile stretched wider than necessary. He looked like a man who had already made peace with something Ricky didn't yet know. "You making history, amigo," Blandon said, his voice carrying pride. "Bigger than anyone." Ricky smirked. "Money's good." No, Blandon said, waving a finger. "Not money, influence." Ricky didn't respond. Something in Blandon's tone disturbed him. Then Blandon placed his fork down and leaned forward. "You trust me, yes?" Ricky paused. Why would he ask that? Why tonight? Why now? "Yeah," Ricky said quietly, but a piece of him didn't. Blandon nodded slowly. "Good. Because opportunity coming, but you must move. Carefully. Carefully." The word echoed in Ricky's head like a warning disguised as advice. That night, Ricky went home with an uneasy stomach. He counted money, but felt none of the joy it once gave him. He stared at the product in his safe, but felt none of the thrill he once had. His instincts, sharp, disciplined, trained by years of surviving the hood, were screaming. Something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what. The next few weeks only intensified that feeling. Blandon became harder to reach, always traveling, always handling business. Henry started acting skittish, avoiding eye contact. Sometimes Ricky would return to a meeting spot and feel like someone had been watching. Dealers whispered about new faces hanging around corners, faces too clean, too calm, too pale for South Central. The streets were talking, and the streets were rarely wrong. Still, the operation expanded. Ricky bought warehouses. He bought cars. He bought entire apartment complexes. His empire grew so large that rival dealers didn't even bother challenging him. They joined him. His operations stretched across California, then into Texas, Ohio, Missouri, Louisiana. It was no longer a street hustle. It was a pipeline blinking with life from coast to coast. And the more successful he got, the more invisible Blandon became. One afternoon, Ricky decided to stop by the Nicaraguan's Los Angeles house, unannounced. When he arrived, the place was empty. Curtains open, chairs pushed back, coffee cups still half full, like someone had left in a hurry, not escaped, but moved, quietly, secretly, purposefully. "Where the hell you at?" Ricky muttered to himself, pacing through the silent living room. He found mail stacked on the table. Some envelopes had government seals, some had foreign stamps, some were marked confidential. Ricky felt a chill crawl up his neck. He left immediately. That night, Gary, the polite white man with the soft voice, called him. "You around?" Gary asked casually, as if nothing was strange. "Yeah," Ricky said. "What's up?" "Just checking in. Need something soon. Business is good." Ricky hesitated. For the first time, Gary's politeness felt dangerous. Yeah, Ricky said softly. We can do that. When the call ended, Ricky sat alone in his living room, elbows on his knees, hands folded tightly. The city outside buzzed with life. Sirens, gunshots, distant shouting, a rhythm South Central had known for decades. But for Ricky, the noise felt muted, as if the world was holding its breath. He realized something. Blandon didn't just disappear. He was moved, protected, handled, and that meant only one thing. Ricky wasn't working with a supplier anymore. He was working inside a system, a machine, a strategy, a government operation disguised as a drug pipeline. And when the government is done using someone, the government destroys them. Ricky didn't know it yet, but he had already been marked. The trap was set, the players were in position, and the next move wouldn't be his, would be theirs. The trap didn't snap all at once. It tightened, slowly, quietly, like a snake winding itself around its prey, inch by inch, breath by breath, until escape became impossible. Ricky didn't fall because he made one mistake. He fell because the walls moved in on him from every direction at the same time, engineered by people he didn't even know existed. The first real sign came when one of his longtime dealers, someone he trusted, someone he grew up with, was arrested and released the same night. Same night. No charges, no bail. When Ricky heard the news, he froze. In South Central, the police didn't release drug dealers. They kept them. They interrogated them. They squeezed them until they bled information. The only time they released someone early was when that person suddenly became useful. A cooperating witness, an informant, a ticking time bomb. Ricky didn't accuse him. He didn't confront him. That wasn't his style. Instead, he quietly cut him out of the operation, told him to take a break, told him he didn't need him anymore. Better to distance him than provoke him. Better to let him drift away without suspicion. But the damage was already done. The government had finally breached his circle. Still, Ricky stayed careful. He moved his stash houses. He cut down his routes. He stopped carrying anything himself. For the first time in years, he felt small again. A kid walking through dangerous streets with something heavy in his pocket. The illusion of control was slipping. But the biggest danger wasn't the men who betrayed him. It was the man who smiled at him. Gary. Soft-spoken, friendly, always relaxed, always calm. He had a way of talking that made people feel safe. And that was the problem. Ricky didn't know that Gary had been working with federal agents for years. Didn't know that every handshake, every casual conversation, every, "Hey man, what's the price today?" was being catalogued, recorded, archived. Didn't know that innocent questions about quantities and quality were being fed into a thick file with his name on it. To Ricky, Gary was just another wealthy guy who wanted drugs. To the government, Gary was bait. One morning, Gary called again. This time, he sounded different, slightly stressed, slightly rushed, like someone being pushed from behind. "Can you meet today?" Gary asked. "Today?" Ricky paused. "That soon?" Yeah, Gary insisted. "Need a big one. Like last time. Maybe bigger." Ricky's instincts pulsed hard. This didn't feel right. Gary was over-eager. Too eager. "How big?" Ricky asked cautiously. "A kilo," Gary said. "Maybe more." Ricky almost hung up. There was too much. Too fast, too forced. But silence followed. The kind of silence that coils around a decision and suffocates it. Ricky thought of the bills he needed to pay, the businesses he was running, the dealers depending on him. Walking away wasn't easy, anymore. He wasn't the small-time tennis kid hustling for survival. He was a man with a machine behind him. "All right," he finally said. "We'll talk. Let me get things together." When he hung up, a dull ache spread across his chest. He didn't know why. He didn't understand the source of the dread. But he felt it, heavy and unshakable, like a storm building behind the horizon. He should have listened to it. But he didn't. He made the call, set the time, set the location, prepared the product. But fate is cruel, and tragedy loves timing. Hours before the meeting, the apartment where Ricky stored his product was robbed, Not by police, not by rivals, by random street thieves who didn't even know who they had just crossed. They stole everything. The stash, the money, the backup, even the profit for the week. It was the kind of bad luck that should never happen on a day like this. When Ricky arrived at the meeting spot empty-handed, he expected Gary to be angry. Instead, the man was silent, too silent. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicked around, scanning. For the first time, Ricky saw something cold under his smile, something metallic, something official. "Where is it?" Gary asked softly. "Got hit," Ricky said. "Everything gone. Need time." Gary stared at him, then nodded slowly. "All right, another day then." But the tone was off. The sentence felt final, not postponed. Ricky didn't know that. At that exact moment, federal agents hidden nearby were whispering into radios. "Abort. He's empty. He didn't bring it. Not enough for the charge." They needed him to hand Gary the product, needed to catch him physically transferring it, needed a clean, undeniable case. Since he didn't, the trap snapped shut on nothing. But the government had patience, far more patience than any man on the streets. Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. The robbery made Ricky reconsider everything. He told Gary he wanted out, told him he was done, told him he was walking away from the game. Gary's reaction was subtle, too subtle. "Oh, that's a shame," he said quietly. "You sure?" "Yeah," Ricky nodded. "I'm done." Gary smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "All right," he said. "We'll talk again." But inside, he wasn't calm. He was panicking, because Gary's job wasn't to buy drugs. His job was to make Ricky sell them. If Ricky walked away now, the entire operation would collapse. All the recordings would be useless. All the surveillance would be wasted. All the paperwork would amount to nothing. They needed him. They needed him to deliver. They needed him to step into the trap willingly. Gary couldn't let him quit. The government couldn't let him quit. And that meant only one thing. If Ricky wouldn't walk into the trap, they would push him into it. Hard and mercilessly. The fall was coming. Closer than he realized. The moment Ricky said the words, "I'm done," a silent alarm went off in rooms he had never seen, among men whose names he would never know. The kind of rooms with fluorescent lights, stale coffee, and whiteboards full of crossed-out dates and coded arrows. Rooms where his face had become a project, a target, a deadline. For the task force, quitting wasn't an option he was allowed to choose. His freedom wasn't his decision. His retirement wasn't his call. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a file, a mission, a line item in a federal budget. And that meant if he wouldn't take the last step on his own, they would drag him across it. The next morning, Ricky's phone rang. Gary. Always Gary. He didn't sound panicked anymore. He sounded friendly again. Too friendly. A man pretending nothing had happened. Pretending he didn't care that yesterday's deal had evaporated. Pretending the clock wasn't ticking. "Hey, man," he said with fake warmth. "Thought about that thing. We can try again. Smaller if you want." "No," Ricky said. "Told you. I'm out." Another pause. A little too long. "Come on," Gary said, lowering his voice like a father reasoning with a stubborn son. "Just one more. Help me out. I'm in a tight spot." Ricky didn't like that tone. Didn't like the pressure. Didn't like the guilt under the words. "You'll be okay," Ricky said. "You don't need me." Gary exhaled sharply, not annoyed, but calculating. The kind of exhale a man makes when he adjusts his strategy. "All right," he said softly. "But listen, if things get rough for me, it's going to look bad if someone thinks I didn't pay my people back. You know, might send the wrong message." Ricky frowned. "What you saying?" "Nothing, just don't make me look like a liar." It was a threat disguised as friendship. Not direct, not loud, not obvious, but a threat all the same. Ricky hung up, his stomach twisted. For the first time in a long time, he felt hunted. Around him, the city felt different. Edges sharper, shadows longer, helicopters buzzed more frequently, police cruisers slid past with suspicious slowness. The air had a weight to it, the kind that presses against your skin until you feel watched, even when you're alone. He tried to distract himself by focusing on Cincinnati, buying property, meeting legitimate people, planning actual businesses. But every time his phone buzzed, every time a car slowed near him, every time a stranger glanced too long, something deep in his chest tightened. Being a king was dangerous, but being a king who tries to leave the throne, that was fatal. A week passed, no drugs, no deals, no movement. The task force grew impatient, silent rooms turned tense, agents complained, supervisors argued, deadlines loomed. The operation, built for months, was collapsing because the star target found his conscience too late. One morning, before sunrise, everything shifted. A car rolled up outside Ricky's place, not fast, not loud, deliberate. Inside were two men, calm, clean. The kind of clean you only see on undercover agents, hair trimmed, shirts tucked, eyes empty. They didn't get out. They didn't knock. They just waited. Ricky watched them from behind the curtain. His heartbeat thundered. He didn't know their names, but he knew their function. Pressure. Gary called again that afternoon. This time, he didn't play nice. This time, the mask slipped. "Rick, I need you," he said quietly. "Please, you don't understand what's happening." "I said I'm done," Ricky repeated. "You can't be done," Gary said. "Not now. You promised." "I didn't promise shit." "Yes, you did," Gary whispered. "You did when you took money from them. They're not patient men, Rick. Them." The word hung in the air like smoke from a gun. "Who's them?" Ricky asked. Gary hesitated. "There's a lot you don't know," he said. "Just meet me. One last time. Then you're free." And that was the moment Ricky's fate sealed. Not when he touched a kilo, not when he made millions, not when he built an empire. His life ended the moment he said, "Fine, one last time." Because one last time is the most dangerous sentence a man in that world can say. When they met again, the sun was setting. Neutral ground, public space, nothing incriminating. Ricky walked up with his hands empty. He wasn't carrying anything except suspicion. Gary, on the other hand, was jittery, nervous, looking around too much, sweating even though the air was cool. He wanted this meeting over with, wanted it to end. Wanted Ricky to take the bait, but Ricky felt the tension, felt the trap just beneath the surface. "I told you," Ricky said firmly. "I ain't got nothing, and I ain't getting nothing. We're talking only." Gary swallowed hard. His voice cracked. That's not good enough." Ricky stepped back. "Then we're done here." Gary froze. His eyes flashed with something desperate. For a split second, Ricky saw the truth. Gary was scared. More scared than Ricky. Scared of someone else. Someone above him. Someone who demanded results. Someone watching everything. When Ricky walked away, he didn't look back. But he should have. Because the moment he turned, Gary pulled out his phone. His hands shook. He dialed fast. "He won't bite," Gary whispered, voice breaking, almost pleading. "What do you want me to do?" And on the other end, a voice answered him, calm, emotionless. "Make him bite." Gary closed his eyes, exhaled, nodded to himself. Then he said the sentence that sealed Ricky's fate. "Okay, I'll set it up." And just like that, the trap was reset. Bigger, sharper, deadlier than before. The fall was no longer coming. It had already begun. The night before, everything collapsed. Ricky Ross couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls breathe with him, feeling the air pulse with a kind of invisible electricity. His instincts, those same instincts that saved him 1,000 times in South Central, were whispering the same thing over and over. Something is coming. He tried to ignore it, tried to tell himself he was being paranoid, tried to pretend Gary's fear wasn't contagious. But paranoia isn't paranoia when people really are following you, when people really are watching, when people really are waiting for you to make one wrong move. The next morning, Ricky woke up early, too early. A bad sign. Men in his line of work learned that waking up before dawn with a pounding heart wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. He made coffee, didn't drink it, paced the kitchen, checked the window, checked his phone, checked the window again. Something told him that if he left the house today, his life would split into a before and after. At noon, Gary called. He sounded different this time. Almost broken. Like someone who had run out of time and excuses, someone who wasn't pretending anymore. "Rick," he whispered, "you gotta help me. They're gonna kill me." Ricky froze. "Who?" "They," Gary said. "You know who I mean." His voice cracked. A scared man. A cornered man. "Come by," Ricky said slowly. "We'll talk." "No," Gary said instantly. "Not at your place. They're watching you." A chill crawled up Ricky's spine. "Where then?" Gary hesitated, breathing hard, thinking fast, or trying to sound like he was. "There's a warehouse just outside town. Private, quiet, no cameras, no neighbors, no interruptions." Every syllable was a red flag. A warehouse, outside town, no cameras, no neighbors, no interruptions. It was practically the definition of a setup. "Why there?" Ricky asked. "It's the only place they'll let me meet you," Gary said, voice trembling. "Please, man. I don't have anyone else." Ricky rubbed his forehead. He knew the streets. He knew the game. And every fiber in his body screamed, "This is a trap." "No," Ricky said quietly. "I ain't going to no warehouse." Gary exhaled sharply, not like a man relieved, but like a man whose last chance just slipped through his fingers. "They said you'd say that," he whispered. Ricky's heartbeat stopped for a moment. They told me to bring you," Gary said. "If I don't, I'm done." Ricky clenched his jaw. He didn't want Gary to die, but he didn't want to walk into a cage either. "Listen," Ricky said slowly. "There's got to be another way. We can figure this." "They'll kill me," Gary said again, panicked now, on the verge of sobbing. "You don't understand. These aren't gangbangers. These aren't Colombians. These are government men. They do not forgive failure." Ricky felt a cold drop of dread slide down his spine. Government men. Of course, everything clicked at once. The threats, the setups, the pressure, the mysterious they. Gary wasn't scared of dealers, or gangsters, or cartel men. He was scared of the agents babysitting him, the ones he worked for now, the ones he betrayed Ricky for, the ones who needed Ricky in chains to justify the operation. "Just meet me," Gary begged. "Please. They're watching me right now. They told me to tell you. They know you're listening." Ricky looked at the phone like it was a snake. They were listening already. He hung up. Silence filled the room. Dense, suffocating, final. He grabbed his keys, opened the door, stopped. Outside, across the street, a car engine was running. 2 silhouettes inside, waiting. His breath locked. He was already in the trap. Whether he met Gary or not, the jaws had already closed around him. He backed inside slowly, quietly, like a man trying not to wake something sleeping. He paced again, then stopped, then said the sentence he would regret for the rest of his life. "All right, I'll go." Because he wasn't really going to help Gary. And he wasn't going because he trusted him. He was going because he realized the truth. You don't escape the government. You negotiate with it, or you run forever. And Ricky Ross wasn't built to run. Not anymore. The drive to the warehouse felt like the longest drive of his life. Every car behind him felt like a tail. Every shadow felt like a lookout. Every empty road felt like a tunnel closing in. The warehouse stood alone in a dead industrial field. No workers, no cars, no noise, just wind. And a single silver sedan parked out front. Gary stood next to it, shaking. When their eyes met, Ricky finally understood. Gary wasn't scared of dying. He was scared because the deal was already made. His betrayal wasn't coming. It had already happened. The sun was dropping when Ricky stepped out of his car, but the air around the warehouse felt colder than evening should allow. Not normal cold. Unnatural. Like someone had drained the warmth from the entire place just to make sure nothing felt alive here. The building stood silent. Too silent. No birds. No traffic hum. Not even the metallic whistle of wind passing through rusted sheets. Just stillness. Thick and suffocating. Gary stood by the silver sedan, his shoulders hunched like a man carrying a secret that had already broken him. His hands were trembling. Not from the cold, but from guilt threatening to spill out of him. When Ricky walked up, Gary couldn't meet his eyes. That told Ricky everything. This wasn't a meeting. This was a burial. "You came," Gary whispered, voice cracking like something inside him had already snapped. "You asked," Ricky replied, his tone calm. But his heart wasn't. Something deep in his chest felt off, like a chair, missing a leg, like the ground wasn't solid. Gary swallowed hard. His face twitched. His jaw trembled. He looked like he wanted to confess something. But confessions don't stop machines once they start moving. "I didn't want it like this," Gary said quietly. "I really didn't." Ricky stared at him. "Then why? Why didn't you tell me what was going on?" Gary looked up, and for a moment his fear disappeared. What replaced it was something far worse. Acceptance. "They own me now," he whispered. "They told me I owe them results." Ricky froze. "Who?" he asked. But he already knew. Gary didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because that's exactly when Ricky heard it. A low hum. Distant at first, like a swarm of insects in the sky. Then it grew louder. Engines, multiple. Slow at first, then surrounding the area. Then closing in. Ricky's pulse spiked. He stepped back instinctively, eyes scanning the open field around them. From the east, a van turned. From the west, an SUV, another from behind. They didn't come fast because they didn't need to. This wasn't a chase. This wasn't an arrest. This was an extraction. Gary's breathing turned sharp. "Please don't run," he whispered. "Just don't run. If you run, they'll shoot." Ricky didn't run. He didn't even move. He just stared at Gary. This man, he called brother. This man, he trusted more than anyone in the game. "You gave me up?" Ricky asked softly, the words barely audible. Gary closed his eyes. "I didn't have a choice." Ricky didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't rage. He just nodded once, as if something deep inside him finally fell into place. Every instinct he ignored, every warning he brushed aside, every time his gut screamed, every moment he told himself it would be fine. It all led here, to this moment, to this betrayal. The vehicles formed a half circle, doors opened, boots hit the ground, agents stepped out, not rushing, not shouting, just moving with deadly confidence. The kind men have when the outcome is guaranteed. One of them raised a megaphone. "Ricardo Ross, step forward with your hands visible." Gary backed up slowly, inch by inch, like distance could free him from what he'd done. "Rick," he whispered, unable to say more. Ricky didn't look at him. He looked at the agents. The strange thing was, he wasn't scared, he wasn't shaking, he wasn't even angry. He just felt numb. Like the story he lived his whole life had finally revealed the ending written long before he ever stepped into it. He held up his hands. Agents moved in, guns lowered, but ready, feet crunching on gravel, a slow march of inevitability. As they approached, Ricky took one last look at Gary. The man was crying now. Silent, broken tears sliding down a face that knew forgiveness was impossible. Ricky didn't hate him. Not in that moment. He only felt one thing. This was always going to happen. A hand grabbed his wrist. Another pushed him forward. Cold steel locked around his wrists with a click far louder than it needed to be. That sound wasn't just handcuffs. It was the end of an era, the closing of a chapter, the collapse of an empire, and as agents pinned him down, searched him, and dragged him toward the van. He didn't resist, because the truth was painfully simple. He wasn't being arrested. He was being collected, picked up from a world he helped build, removed from a city he helped reshape, taken by the same system that quietly fueled the crack he sold. From the shadows behind the van, someone watched, someone wearing no badge, no uniform, no name. And that was the moment Ricky understood. The people who controlled this operation were nowhere in sight. The people who wanted him, who used Gary, who flooded his city with product, who protected their own traffickers while hunting him. They were still invisible, still untouched, still in power. As the doors slammed shut and darkness swallowed him, Ricky felt the final truth settle into his bones. You can outrun gangs, you can outrun rivals, you can outrun bullets, but you can't outrun the government. Not even if you built an empire, not even if you tried to quit, not even if you walked away, because the moment they decide you're done, you're done. The van smelled like old rubber and fear, not his fear. Ricky wasn't afraid anymore. It was the fear of every man who had ever sat in that metal cage before him, the fear soaked into the seats, into the handles, into the walls, the fear of people who thought they still had a chance. Ricky didn't think that. He just stared at the floor, wrists burning from the cuffs, listening to the muffled radio chatter from the front seat. Target secured. Repeat, target secured. Transport en route. He was no longer a person. He was a package. Gary wasn't there anymore. Of course he wasn't. People like Gary never stay to watch the consequences of their own choices. They disappear. Quickly, quietly, hoping distance can erase guilt. The van drove for a long time. Long enough for the sky to go from gold to red to black. Long enough for Ricky to wonder if this was the ride where he'd vanish forever. But eventually, the van slowed, turned and rolled up to a cold federal building where the lights hummed like insects and the walls looked like they had heard too many confessions. When the doors opened, a flood of fluorescent white hit him. Not sunlight, the kind of light that makes every flaw visible. "Watch your step," one agent said. Ricky didn't respond. He walked inside. Fingerprinting, photography, paperwork, cold hands, cold rooms, cold voices. Everything felt mechanical, like he was being processed through a machine that didn't care who he was or what story brought him here. They sat him in a holding cell, a small concrete box with no window and a flickering light that buzzed like a broken wasp. Hours passed. Maybe minutes. Time didn't behave normally in places like this. Then a door opened. A lawyer walked in. Not someone he hired, someone assigned. The man looked tired, underpaid, overworked. One of those lawyers who handled too many cases and lost sleep over none of them. "Mr. Ross," he said, flipping through a file thick enough to kill a small animal if dropped. "You're facing major federal drug trafficking charges, and it's not looking good." Ricky didn't move, didn't blink. The lawyer continued, voice flat. "Controlled delivery, recorded conversations, eyewitness testimony, your supplier cooperating, multiple agencies involved. They want you, badly." Ricky leaned forward slightly. "My supplier?" The lawyer nodded. "Danilo Blandon." The name hit harder than the arrest. Blandon, the man who stood by him, the man who gave him endless supply, the man who warned him about raids, the man who protected him, the man who swore he was family, the man who now sat on the government's side of the room. "He's testifying against you," the lawyer said, "in exchange for leniency, reduced sentence, financial compensation, permanent residency." Ricky blinked once. "So he walks? More or less?" "And I don't." The lawyer closed the file. "They want you to pay for all of it." Ricky leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if answers might be written there. All those nights, all that risk, all that loyalty, all that product sold, all those lives destroyed, all those millions made. And in the end, the man he trusted most sold him faster than anyone. "Trial is in 2 weeks, the lawyer said. "They're piling on charges. They're trying to give you life." life. He expected years, decades maybe, but life. The weight of that word sat heavily on his chest. The lawyer kept talking. Your best chance is a plea deal. If you cooperate. Ricky stopped him with a single sentence. I don't snitch. And the lawyer sighed as if he'd heard those words 100 times from men who regretted them later. Just think about it. He left. The cell went silent again. Hours later, 2 guards came, cuffed him, and escorted him to the courtroom through a back tunnel, a hidden path designed so defendants never touched the world outside. When Ricky stepped into the courtroom, he saw him, Blandon, sitting at a table, clean suit, fresh haircut, calm eyes, a man untouched by consequence. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't even look relieved. He looked relieved to be done lying. Next to him sat federal agents, relaxed, comfortable, like this was routine, because for them, it was. Ricky was led to his seat. He never looked away from Blandon. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, Blandon blinked. Just once. Then he looked down. Not out of guilt, out of finality. Their story was over. Then the judge entered. People rose. People sat. The trial began. The prosecutor spoke first, a polished, confident man with no doubts and no conscience. Your Honor, the defendant operated one of the largest crack distribution networks in American history. He pointed at Ricky like he was presenting evidence, not a man. Flooding South Central with narcotics, fueling violence, and amassing millions of dollars. He let the silence hang, all with the assistance of international traffickers. Then he pointed toward Blandon, and we have testimony. Ricky stared at the table. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. In his world, betrayal wasn't a twist. It was a guarantee. The prosecutor continued. Your Honor, this wasn't just crime. This was an empire. And today, it ends. The words echoed through the courtroom like a verdict spoken long before the gavel hit. And Ricky understood something in that moment. They weren't punishing him for what he did. They were punishing him for what he represented. Success, scale, power, knowledge. A man from the streets who learned too much. A man who became too big to ignore. A man who could expose the bigger truth behind the curtain. And the system had only one solution for men like that. Erase them. The courtroom air felt heavier than prison air. It wasn't the walls or the lighting or the crowd. It was the feeling that everyone already knew the ending before the story was even told. Ricky could feel it, like walking into a movie where the hero dies in the first scene, and the rest is just watching the world pretend to care. The prosecutor called his first witness, Danilo Blandon. Ricky didn't turn his head, didn't need to. He could feel Blandon stand, could hear his shoes scrape the floor, could sense him walk past like a ghost wearing skin. The man's presence felt different now. Lighter, freer, untouched. He wasn't in danger. He was protected. When he took the stand, he adjusted the microphone like he'd done it before, because he had. This wasn't his first time cooperating. It wouldn't be his last. The prosecutor approached with a soft smile, like Blandon was a victim, not a perpetrator. Mr. Blandon, he began, please tell the court how you met the defendant. Blandon cleared his throat gently. Rehearsed. I met Ricky Ross years ago. We began doing business together. Drug business? The prosecutor asked. Yes, Blandon replied. Cocaine. Large quantities. And who provided these quantities? I did. And where did you get them? A pause. Calculated, careful, intentionally vague. From sources, he said. Connections I had before coming to the United States. The judge didn't blink. The prosecutor didn't blink. Nobody blinked. Nobody wanted to know his sources. Nobody wanted to know who protected him. Nobody wanted to know why a man linked to international cocaine pipelines was testifying instead of being prosecuted. They only wanted Ricky. Did the defendant knowingly distribute cocaine on a major scale? Yes. Did he profit from these sales? Yes. Did he help create a network that spread crack cocaine across Los Angeles? Blandon hesitated for the briefest moment, then said, yes. The word landed like a hammer. Ricky didn't flinch, didn't breathe, didn't move. He wasn't surprised. He had prepared himself for this exact moment. But what hurt wasn't the accusation. It was how ordinary Blandon sounded, how easily he sold the man who helped him build his fortune, how soft his voice was while destroying Ricky's life, like he was describing the weather or reading a grocery list. The prosecutor smiled. No further questions. Then he looked at Ricky's lawyer, the man who had no weapons, no leverage, no ammunition, except a stack of papers and a tired suit. Your witness? The lawyer stood slowly, but he wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to survive. Mr. Blandon, he said, flipping through notes as if searching for a miracle. You are currently cooperating with the government, correct? Yes. As part of a deal? Yes. A deal that lowers your sentence? Yes. A deal that ensures you are not prosecuted to the full extent of the law? Yes. And you were facing... what? Life? The courtroom shifted. The prosecutor stiffened slightly. Blandon nodded. Yes, potentially life. And yet, the lawyer continued, you received... what? A little over 2 years? A murmur rippled through the room. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. Order. Is that correct? The lawyer pressed. Yes, Blandon said without shame. So, to be clear, you escaped a life sentence by testifying against Mr. Ross. Yes. And in return, you keep your residency? Yes. And you even received payment from federal agencies? Yes. Ricky watched as a few jurors shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't justice. This was theater. But theater still ends with someone in chains. The lawyer leaned forward. One more question, Mr. Blandon. Did you ever tell Mr. Ross that your operations were connected to the U.S. government? Silence hit the room like a sudden cold wind. The prosecutor stood immediately. Objection! Irrelevant! But everyone knew it wasn't irrelevant. It was the heart of everything. The judge paused. Her eyes hardened. Sustained. Move on. And just like that, the truth was erased. The lawyer sighed. Defeated. No further questions. Blandon stepped down from the stand and walked past Ricky without looking at him. He didn't need to. Ricky already understood Blandon didn't betray him for safety, or fear, or pressure. He betrayed him because the system gave him a choice. Give us him, or we'll take you. And he chose himself. When Ricky's turn came to speak, the courtroom expected anger, expected excuses, expected denial. But Ricky stood tall, looked at the judge, the prosecutor, the jury, the agents, and said something simpler. I wasn't the only one. The prosecutor stiffened. Ricky continued, voice calm, steady, resigned. Crack didn't come from me. It didn't come from my people. It came from a pipeline bigger than all of us. The judge narrowed her eyes. Mr. Ross. No, Ricky said. You want to punish me? Fine. I accept that. But don't pretend I built this alone. Don't pretend the people testifying against me are innocent. Don't pretend the people behind them don't exist. The courtroom froze. The prosecutor stepped forward. Your Honor, I move to strike. Ricky spoke louder. You want the truth? You'll never hear it here, because the truth isn't in this room. He looked directly at the agents in the front row, the ones who never blinked. It's behind it. The judge slammed her gavel. Mr. Ross, that is enough. But it didn't matter. Ricky had already said the one thing the system feared most, the truth. And truth is dangerous, especially when the wrong man says it in the right room. The courtroom felt colder the next morning, as if the air itself knew what was coming. Sentencing days always felt like funerals, not loud, not violent, just quiet rooms where hope goes to die without making a sound. Ricky sat there, hands cuffed, surrounded by guards who treated him like cargo. The lawyer beside him shuffled papers he knew wouldn't matter. Nothing mattered now. The trial wasn't lost today. It was lost months ago, when men in expensive suits and clean offices decided they needed a trophy, And Ricky was that trophy. The judge entered, expression carved from stone, a face that had already made her decision long before she sat down. She didn't look at Ricky as a man. She looked at him as a case file, a headline, a statistic, a conclusion. "Mr. Ross, please rise." He stood. For a brief moment, the courtroom was silent. The stillness felt like the world holding its breath. The judge began reading, page after page of legal language, the kind of cold vocabulary that turns lives into paragraphs. Given the scale of distribution, the damage done to the community, the severity of the charges, Ricky didn't hear the rest. His ears rang, his heartbeat slowed, the room blurred. He wasn't scared, he wasn't angry, he was empty. And then the sentence dropped. "The court hereby sentences you to life imprisonment." One word. Life. Not years. Not decades. Life. People in the courtroom gasped softly, as if they didn't realize this story always ends like this. Ricky's lawyer whispered, "I'm sorry." But Ricky didn't look at him. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the prosecutor. He looked at the back of the courtroom, the seats where strangers sat with curious eyes, the reporters scribbling, the agents with blank faces, and far in the corner, for just a second, he saw him. Gary, half hidden, half shaking, half regretting, half relieved. Their eyes met. Gary looked away instantly. He couldn't stand the weight of what he'd done. Ricky didn't hate him, didn't curse him, didn't judge him. He simply stared, because in that single second, Ricky finally understood the full truth. Everybody in that room was surviving. The judge survived by obeying the system. The prosecutor survived by winning. The agents survived by pleasing their superiors. Blandon survived by betraying. Gary survived by cooperating. The media survived by sensationalizing. Everyone lived. Everyone walked free. Except him. He was the sacrifice, the offering, the name to put on the news, the body to bury while keeping the truth untouched. Guards grabbed him by the arms. Cold cuffs tightened. He was escorted out the same way he entered, through back corridors, through tunnels, through doors that shut behind him, like gravity. Camera flashes went off behind him. People whispered. Some shook their heads, like they were watching the downfall of a monster. But Ricky didn't feel like a monster. He felt like a man trapped in a story bigger than him, a story written long before he was born, a story designed to end exactly like this. As the guards walked him down the hallway, a strange calm settled over him. Not peace, just acceptance. He didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't plead. He had given away his tears long ago. He had used up his fear years before this day. All he had left was a simple, devastating awareness. This is how they bury the truth. Inside the transport vehicle, he stared out the small metal window. The city moved by. People walked, cars honked, children laughed. Life went on. Nobody knew a king was being driven to a cage. Nobody cared, and that was the cruelest part of all. He built an empire. He fed a nation. He made millions. He shook the streets. He survived wars. He outsmarted enemies. He created a legend. But the world moved on without him. Just like that, as the gates of the federal prison opened, he felt the final truth settle in his bones. He wasn't entering a cell. He was entering history, the wrong version of it, the version written by the people who won. The bus, carrying Ricky toward federal custody, rattled like old bones, every vibration reminding him that life, as he knew it, was already gone. He watched the city fade out through a metal-barred window, smaller than his hand. Outside, people walked freely, rushing, laughing, cursing, living. It wasn't the sight of freedom that hurt him. It was realizing how quickly the world moves on when you're locked inside a story you can't rewrite. When the prison gates opened, the air turned heavier. The guards were not cruel, not kind, just empty. They processed him like paperwork. Fingerprints, clothing, number, rules, silence. Inside, the cell block was alive with a different kind of noise, whispers, metal clanks, footsteps echoing like threats. But the inmates didn't stare at him the way the streets once did. Fame didn't matter here. Hustle didn't matter here. Money didn't matter here. Only survival did. Yet something strange happened in the weeks that followed. Ricky didn't fold. Men twice his size tried to test him. He held his ground. Inmates with dead eyes tried to intimidate him. He stared right back. The prison expected him to break. But slowly, word spread. This one, he's different. He wasn't violent, he wasn't desperate, he wasn't stupid, he was focused. His cell became a classroom. His bunk became a desk. His nights became study sessions with books borrowed from anyone willing to trade. Economics, law, psychology, history. He devoured everything. Even the guards noticed the change. "Ross, you're always reading." "I'm trying to understand the world that put me here." Months turned into years, and the fire inside him didn't dim. It sharpened. He wasn't planning revenge. He was planning clarity. The truth behind his downfall, behind Gary, behind the system, slowly began to reveal itself. But the real twist was still waiting. A rumor whispered through the yard, carried by men who'd seen too much and trusted too little. Someone escaped. No one escapes from here. Someone helped them, someone with connections. And in the shadows of the yard, men kept glancing toward Ricky, because even behind bars, his influence hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone underground. The rumor didn't die. It moved through the prison like cold air, quiet, invisible, impossible to ignore. Men who never spoke started watching Ricky with cautious respect. The guards tightened their routines. Even the warden began making more rounds than usual. Something had shifted. Something big. One evening, Ricky sat alone in the yard when an older inmate, a man with silver eyebrows and scars that told stories without words, sat down beside him. He didn't introduce himself, didn't look at Ricky, just stared straight ahead at the fence topped with razor wire. "You ever wonder why you're really here?" the man asked. Ricky didn't respond. The old man continued anyway. They needed someone to blame, someone visible, someone big enough to make headlines, but not big enough to touch the people pulling the strings. Ricky turned to him. "You talk like you know something. I know the difference between a criminal and a pawn," the man whispered. Before Ricky could ask more, the old man stood up and walked away. No explanation, no clarification, just a spark that ignited something deep in Ricky's chest. That night, lying on his bunk, he thought of Gary, the friend he trusted, the friend who folded, the friend who broke under pressure. Ricky didn't even know existed, but the more he replayed the memories, the more the pieces began to connect in ways he had never seen before. Gary didn't betray him out of fear. Gary betrayed him because the government held something over him. They used him, just like they used Blandon, just like they used the suppliers, just like they used Ricky. And suddenly, the truth hit him harder than his sentence ever did. This wasn't about drugs. It was about politics. His empire wasn't destroyed because it was dangerous. It was destroyed because it became too visible, too successful, too independent, too uncontrolled. He had built something the streets couldn't ignore, the media couldn't avoid, and the system couldn't tolerate. Inside the prison, he became the quiet center of attention. Inmates approached him with questions about law, life, money, as if he had become a teacher instead of the man they once feared. And slowly, the guards changed too. Some nodded at him with a respect that felt forbidden. One even murmured, "You're smarter than the men who put you here." Ricky didn't smile, didn't thank him, didn't respond, because he wasn't flattered. He was awakened. He started requesting legal documents, appeals, old files, transcripts. He studied every line, every word, every lie. The picture became clearer. His downfall wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Years passed. His reputation remained iron solid inside. His mind sharpened, not softened. He realized he had lost everything, except his ability to rebuild. By the time the parole board finally called his name, he wasn't the same man who walked into prison. He was colder, calmer, wiser, more dangerous, not with violence, but with knowledge. As he exited the prison gates, no crowd waited, no cameras, no reporters, just silence, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Ricky stepped into a world that had changed without him, a world he now understood better than anyone expected. The war wasn't over. It was just about to begin, and this time he wasn't fighting for power. He was fighting for truth. The sun felt different when it hit his skin again, warmer, sharper, almost unfamiliar. Freedom wasn't the explosion he imagined for 10 long years. It was a slow, uncertain breath. He didn't walk out of prison like a king returning to a throne. He walked out like a man learning to breathe again. The streets had changed. The city had changed. People moved faster now. Faces buried in their own worlds. No one recognized him. No one turned to stare. He was a ghost walking through a city he once ruled from the shadows. He passed corners where his runners used to stand, past buildings where his name once meant protection. Now they were just places, empty spaces, with no memory of him. Ricky found a small diner and sat in the back booth. A waitress poured him coffee without asking. He watched the steam rise, thin and fragile, like a life rebuilding itself. Then the bell above the door rang. Gary walked in, older now, heavier, eyes tired in a way only guilt can cause. He didn't see Ricky at first, but when he did, he froze. The kind of stillness that comes from dread, not surprise. Slowly, cautiously, he walked toward the booth. Ricky didn't move, didn't blink, didn't look away. Gary sat across from him, hands shaking. He opened his mouth twice before words finally came out. I didn't know they were going to give you life. Ricky didn't answer. I tried to take it back, I swear I did. Still nothing. They threatened my family, they showed me things, Gary's voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to end like that for you. Ricky finally looked up, not angry, not emotional, just tired. It ended the way it was designed to end, he said softly. Gary swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Ricky looked at him, really looked at him. The friend he grew up with, the friend who broke, the friend who survived the only way he knew how. I forgive you, Ricky said. Gary's eyes widened. But I don't forget, Ricky added calmly. Gary nodded. He understood. Forgiveness wasn't freedom, it was just a closed chapter. Gary left the diner without finishing his coffee. Ricky watched him go. Not with hate, but with the kind of sadness that settles in a man who has seen too much, lost too much, and learned even more. As the door shut behind Gary, a strange clarity washed over Ricky. He didn't want the streets back. He didn't want the empire. He didn't want the throne. He didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. The truth about the system that used men like him. The truth about the pipelines that ran deeper than neighborhoods. The truth about how entire communities were shaped, then shattered, by decisions made in rooms he was never allowed to enter. Walking out of the diner, he felt lighter. Not because he was free, but because for the first time in his life, the war wasn't inside him anymore. He walked down the street with no entourage, no money, no fear. Just a quiet conviction. They took his empire. They took his freedom. They took years of his life. But they never took his mind. And now, that mind was his only weapon. Sharper than any gun, harder than any storm, and finally pointed in the right direction. As he disappeared into the flow of the city, one truth followed him like a shadow. Some kings return to claim their throne. But the rare ones, the truly dangerous ones, come back to rewrite the whole game, and Ricky Ross was finally ready to rewrite everything.